Digital out-of-home hit a rough patch with the start of the pandemic in 2020, with consumers' usual outdoor habits pulling back dramatically. That same pullback in behavior resulted in slashed budgets, with reports of global out-of-home spending dropping by over 10% at the time. Now, in 2023, out-of-home is back in full force, with more ways to buy it than ever before. I speak to Ian Dallimore, VP of Digital Growth at Lamar, about the renewed curiosity around how to incorporate the medium into media plans and leverage innovations that these out-of-home placements uniquely offer. We also discuss opportunities and considerations for programmatic buyers, and how digital out-of-home is becoming an increasing priority for omni-channel planners and buyers. This episode on Digital Out-of-Home with Ian Dallimore starts right now. Obviously, you're an expert at the digital out-of-home space and the out-of-home space. You've been working in it for a really long time, Ian. So I feel like there has been maybe an uprising of curiosity around digital out-of-home and other things that are emerging from that space. So I figured we could start off this conversation by me just asking you, how have people been thinking about digital out-of-home now? And what kind of perspective have you been bringing to clients that are looking to get introduced who otherwise haven't had familiarity?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I'm really excited to be on. The medium has evolved. Lamar specifically has been around. We're in our 121st year. And obviously out of home since the days of the caveman have been around. So for us, seeing that evolution in the very beginning, it was very much around exit here, or just very much branded as the evolution has evolved. What digital out of home has allowed us to bring to the table is really this new way of thinking. And when I talk about new way, that was 20 years ago when we first launched our first roadside digital billboard, and Lamar was kind of the first in that space. But very quickly, we started to say like, okay, well, this product's a bit different than the traditional direct product. What can we do with it? So we first ingested data. So we work with weather, now IBM Watson, to trigger creative. We then teetered around with streaming live tweets and Instagram posts. And to fast forward to today, Nora, is over the last 10 years, Lamar has been playing in the programmatic space. So it's really allowed us to not only continue to evolve with our agency out-of-home specialist partners, which is kind of our day-to-day, and then our local advertisers to really kind of be flexible with creative and change it out. But now in kind of my universe is the ability to have impression-based buys or outcome-based buys. So i.e., here's 50 markets that I want to run in. Anytime pollen level is at a certain threshold, I want to run until the pollen count drops. And then the markets that don't have high pollen, I don't want to run anything. And then obviously you can play with all sorts of weather conditions. And then as far as the impression base in the programmatic world, and we can dive deeper into this, but the short answer is it now allows out of home to live in the same world as online, mobile, social, and CTV, and really be an impression-based buy across all media. Because as much as you and I live in this universe, none of us, including myself, woke up and I was like, man, I can't wait to see that ad on Instagram, or I can't wait to see that B-roll on YouTube or TikTok, or see that billboard. It's just not how we're built. It's just what's our journey throughout the day, and different variations of screens impact us. And we know that dead space used to be out of home, wasn't involved in that impression-based journey across different digital screens. So now we are.
It's a big piece of the conversation is that it is impression-based, and there are now data sources or data considerations we can bring to the table that historically have not been a part of the out-of-home conversation. From the perspective of also the buyer and challenges that a media buyer faces, are there any benefits associated with the buying process that people can take advantage of?
Yeah, and I love that question, because so often people treat the word programmatic when that first came out and it really introduced itself to the out-of-home space. We had to be very careful, and it's actually the topic of what my team's focus is this year, is protecting the true integrity of programmatic, or RTB, real-time bidding. Because so easy, you're right, Nora, is, hey, it's Friday, or today it's 4:00, client just hit me with this budget. I'm an out-of-home specialist focus. I'm not an online media buyer. Let me just log into this platform and push through a buy. That's great. And I think that that's what's made Lamar specifically, and even our friends at Outfront, begin to evolve and look at, okay, we've solved for programmatic. We're seeing significant growth there. But let's that same API that we've built out with real time availability, maybe we need to start to focus on the direct side of our business. So if it's truly more about that out of home specialist is more about automation, then let's do that. So we've since done that. We've rolled out that product and we'll watch that evolution, because what we don't want is cannibalization of existing buys from a certain subset of agencies within the larger holdcos to just move over to programmatic because it's easier to do. So it's really helped our industry on the back end begin to evolve. And we're really at the infancy right now of that.
It feels that way. I know that digital out of home slash programmatic digital out of home have been around for a little bit, but I think in terms of true accessibility, that's really just starting to rise. So I think some of what you just said now, Ian, begs this question: what's the ratio look like? There's still a lot of traditional out of home billboards out in the world, and then there are these now arising digital out of home. What does the split look like, if you can give us some background on that?
It makes up around 10% of our overall inventory compensation, but it makes up revenue wise almost 35% of our overall revenue comes from those 4,500 screens, which from a revenue perspective, that's fascinating. Now, as the evolution evolves, we as a publisher need to make sure we're very careful, because we look at cannibalization within the marketplace as well, because there is a time and a place where both digital and static play together, where traditional static makes more sense. Programmatic, obviously, digital only makes sense. So even within the marketplace, I get asked this question on stage a lot. It's like, well, are you going to transition all 325,000 screens to digital? And the answer is quickly no, because of the latter response I just gave you. But it does play a role, but we're really looking to evolve in markets that maybe don't have digital, or the marketplace itself is a new community pops up, a new town center pops up, and really kind of focus in on, okay, that's a new location. That's where people move. Let's roll out a new digital 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera.
Reasonable to not have the plan to do a mass conversion and turn everything into digital. It makes me also think of this, which is that, of course, there are going to be buyers out there who have been waiting for a transition or a increase in digital boards because they're focused on digital buying. And if there isn't a digital component, maybe that's not in their wheelhouse based on the politics or whatever the structure of labor is in relation to media buying. But then on the flip side, I wonder for traditional buyers, whether that be businesses that work directly with Lamar or other out of home companies, or it's full service agencies, holding companies, whoever it is that's doing a lot of out of home buying, where sometimes they see it as a negative in the sense of there being a proliferation in the growth of these digital boards. I work for a digital company, so digital always sounds good to me. But one thing that comes to mind is I'm on the highway and I'm looking at a screen, there's an impression, and then it flips. It flips to something else, whereas the static board, it stays there, it's stagnant. I can look at it for a suspended period of time. That's just one example, but is that ever a question that comes up? Are there people who prefer to only be on static billboards versus those impression-based billboards, or whatever that out-of-home structure is? Wanted to get some of your perspective on how people are reacting to that.
Yeah, so obviously digital has attracted, on the programmatic side, a lot of the omni-channel DSPs. So they live in that universe. All they care about is that impression. And what you're talking about is extremely important in the out-of-home space. And it's what the medium does really well. But I'll give you a real life example. One of my favorite brands, Gooder Sunglasses, we'll give them a shout out. They're absolutely amazing company, but they've never utilized out-of-home. And they kind of shied away from it. They liked the idea of the traditional direct and maybe doing something fun. This past summer was the first time they ever utilized digital and traditional static. So I'll kind of quickly walk you through it. So like what you guys deal with on a day-to-day basis, they have their audience segmentations, they have their first party data, and they basically said like, okay, programmatically, we can overlay that first party data and you can insert any brand that has been doing this for quite some time with Lamar on the programmatic side. Insert X audience segmentation, first party data, pipe that in, and then here's the DMA market list. Oh, by the way, We're going to drop a pixel in on our website. We're going to do device ID passbacks to then track the effectiveness of the digital campaign. So you have that one campaign. Simultaneously, they took a very important market to them, which I'm being very facetious here. Their CEO is a flamingo, obviously not in real life, but his name is Carl. So we collaborated with them and we said, okay, we actually have a Carl, Georgia. And in Carl, Georgia, there's a mayor. And how much fun would it be if we did this massive build out? We gained PR. You flew your entire social team down. You did TikToks of the billboard. You even got to go into City Hall and have the mayor and the whole city of 169 people. You handed out free glasses. So real quickly, to kind of summarize that example, is you have first party data, digital, very impression based, and then you're utilizing the same category out of home on the traditional direct side. You build out this 3D flamingo, you introduce him to the town, you integrated now in social, you also integrated in obviously PR. And those are two drastically different mediums, but it's one cohesive campaign that have used both new age technology with digital and data and measurement and social. And then you utilize the traditional direct side to really just capture your attention and the wow. So long-winded way of saying, if done correctly, we see brands utilizing both.
So you really launched into a pretty sophisticated example of the way that people can really bring in a lot of different data sources to the table, as Gooder particularly decided to, and also leveraging the wow factor of what out of home brings to the table. So maybe the best of both worlds. If someone is looking to understand what those opportunities could look like, maybe they're not looking to go as big as what you're describing, but they want to bring their data into the equation and they haven't executed in the digital out of home space before. How do you set them up for success? What do you ask them to share with you so that they can build a pretty sophisticated digital out of home plan?
Yeah, we get asked, actually, we had a call earlier this morning with an actual regional local client. And the short answer is they're like, hey, we really just want to do an impression based buy. We have our audience and we use this third party data company. And it's fascinating, or because the conversation happens pretty quickly. It's like, well, it's a pharma company. So you know what? We have cross-X data as well. So the first question is like, okay, what are your KPIs of your campaign? So if you want to run digital and we see it very much like, okay, this is an audience impression based target campaign, then we quickly shift you over to programmatic. The first question is do you have a seat? And do you have a seat on a platform? And very quickly, they kind of get confused. They're like, wait, out of home seat? And we're like, yeah, do you have a seat on any of the omni-channel DSPs? And most of them, even at the local level, they're like, well, yeah, that's how I buy CTV and all other media. So quickly, what we do is we understand what the KPIs of the campaign. We understand in that pharma example, what data sets are they using across other media. So if on online for pharma, they're using cross-X, we say, okay, perfect. We have cross-X. We then, based on the DMAs and the markets, which is a bit different for digital, obviously, because in the digital universe, traditional digital that you guys live in, it's the impressions, it's the audience. For us, we take it another step further and we narrow it down to, hey, what audience are you looking to target? Okay, here's the third party data. We have access to that as well. What markets do you want to be in and what's your flight? And then just like any other traditional digital media, online, mobile, social, we just build out a deal ID and we push it towards that seat, which that right there, that conversation wouldn't happen 3 years ago. And that's what got the industry to where it is today. Is in order for us to participate and get those massive digital budgets and be a part of the consumer journey, path to purchase, the only way that you can do that is if your inventory is accessible to DSPs, whether they're omni-channel or not.
What does the matching process look like in the digital out of home space? So just to elaborate on that question, I've got a certain number of files. Let's say I have 500,000 files, like email files or other types of data that I'm looking to pass along. It's a more complicated matching process because we're looking to go up against billboards and bus shelters and wherever Lamar potentially has these like digital out of home or out of home opportunities. It's going to be different than trying to reach people, match it back to like people's TV screens at home or their computers. So can you tell me a little bit about the variation and what that matching process looks like?
Yeah, so we're talking about MAIDs and device IDs. So for us, and look, I tell people this all the time, and it may ruffle some feathers with some other out of home companies, but we're a billboard company. Our job is to make the product more sophisticated, and our connections are our sweet sauce that then connects to these elaborate platforms. So I say that because it's not our job in the out of home space, nor should it be, because it'd be a little sketchy. But when we work programmatically with these SSPs, we're working with the same companies, whether it's LiveRamp and their robust matchup platforms. All we're doing is just passing off those timestamps on when that ad played. And then in return, our job is to pass the timestamps along. The different third-party companies that we work with, they're capturing those MAIDs. They're automatically capturing those exposed files that were exposed to that digital out of home. The third-party platforms are the ones that are collecting that data, whether it's a LiveRamp or others. And then if it's utilized correctly in a third-party omnichannel DSP, those files are captured, and then they're able to take those captured files and then retarget them on mobile, social, online, CTV. And again, going back, it's not the responsibility of the publisher in the out of home space, because that starts to become a little iffy on, well, how'd you get all these device IDs? Did my ad actually play? Our job is just to verify. And then the third party data platforms that's their responsibility to capture.
From there, I wanted to also ask you about people coming back to the digital out of home space. So kind of a pivot in our conversation, knowing that we were just a little over 2 years ago in a world where the vast majority of people were still working from home, and a lot of out of home buying had taken a setback. People were saying people aren't on the road, people aren't out in public, people have to be at home. How can we continue justify having this on plans? Now it's 2 years later. Has it been a massive comeback? In what types of industries? Is there an even stronger initiative or push for out of home? And are there some industries where there's been a pullback or some sort of strategic reason for why buying is just continuing to lag?
Yeah, great question. I loved the fact from the publisher media side that we were early on in programmatic whenever the pandemic hit. Immediately, our numbers on March 13th started to decline. March 15th is when it went to zero on programmatic. As it relates to the other side of our business, I won't go deep into that. But I was excited about that. I'm like, this proves out that these are not just, hey, we're just lazy buyers, so we're just going to buy. And it also proved out that we weren't talking to the out of home specialists. These were true omni-channel DSP buys, and they shut off everything. I'm sure you guys experienced that as well. Everything was cut off. It was like, okay, we're going to either cut it off or we're going to slow it down little to nothing. We're going to take a step back and figure out what's happening, right? Obviously, the first and easy one was, rightfully so, is, okay, assumption, no one's on the road. Everyone stay at home for 2 weeks. So we saw that. But what was interesting, and I love this, is so often in our space, out of home, not on the local side, obviously, but on the national side of brands, the top 250 brands, oftentimes they're very hesitant out of home anyway. Or if they do spin it out of home, it's very much like, I have to be in New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, those kind of tent poles. And I've always laughed, obviously being a Baton Rouge based company and where I am in the South here. And remind me, you're in Chicago?
Chicago.
Perfect example, right? So for you, what the pandemic meant and looked like was massively different than what it looked like here in Baton Rouge, here in Texas, here in Florida, here in Arizona, where I always like to play this game because it's not about a billboard. It's not about a mobile device or a CTV going back to the multiple screens. It's really about like, okay, well, what does your journey look like? And in the pandemic situation, well, what is your life patterns? Obviously New York, you can't have millions of people jumping on the subway. So immediately there's nobody on the subway, which means nobody's advertising on Outfront's network in the subway. But what we saw is we started to see these buys that they started to uptick because, again, they're looking at real mobility data, and they started to see like, wait, I can't spend my money in New York, LA, Chicago, because obviously there is draconian lockdowns, whatever your thoughts are on it. But by June, July, we started to see those budgets that typically would go to New York, LA, Chicago, and other large markets begin to say, like, okay, well, there's still people moving out and about. We see this with the mobility data that we're utilizing on these third-party platforms. So we started to see a shift in budgets to where typical brands that would spend in New York and LA were starting to spend in Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta. So as these markets came online, and some of them came online quicker than others, some of them came on, turned off, leveled out. But to answer your question, now we really focused in, and programmatic allowed us to really hone in and say, like, okay, this really is about data. It really is about who is moving out and about. But that was a tough year for out of home, which was really tough because we came out of the previous year. We were scheduled to have like an epic year the following year when the pandemic hit. And we were on the rise January, February. And then when March hit, we dropped. Local, we did fine. It came back pretty quick. But roadside the next year took over 60% of programmatic revenue, where in the past we lived around 40% of the overall revenue on these SSPs were capturing roadside billboards. We're at 40, 30, 40. It hit 60 the next year because you still had significant lockdowns. So obviously elevator networks, gyms were still locked down. So you had those networks that were down to zero and making zero money. So, but that budget again had to go somewhere because they saw the mobility of data. So it leveled out and we're beyond back. That next year, we jumped back quickly. Overall, as a company, we did significantly well the following year. And so the growth and trajectory of out of home spend, I think what it's done overall is it's really changed out the perception, which again, being a Southern boy, I love. And I always used to have to mess with our friends out in LA on the movie houses. It's like, hey, by the way, people in New York don't go to the movies. You know where they go to the movies at? They live in Baton Rouge. They live in Kansas City. They live in Birmingham. We don't just need to buy the 10 poles. We need to be very strategic on when and where to buy. And oh, by the way, out of home has shown its flexibility that we can turn it on and off, not just because of a pandemic or the previous year, this past year was, hey, if we have supply chain issues, we could turn it off, we could turn it back on, we can level it out. So I think it really allowed out of home to shine in so many ways.
Are there any resettlings that have occurred? I know you mentioned just a little while ago that it's back and maybe better than ever before, but have there been any instances in which there's been a shift in the way that the market is approaching holistically digital out of home or out of home in general?
Yeah, I think over the last couple of years, D2C, before the pandemic, we started to see a handful of the Caspers of the world, the Row, those type of companies, D2C would purchase in these larger markets and they would utilize out of home. I think now that they've experienced what they have in the out of home space, they begin to look at out of home completely different than they would have before. Before it was a very much branded. So if I'm in a brand, I'd rather brand where the bulk of people are, where I can get the most impressions. Also, Lamar's been doing programmatic for 10 years, but most everyone else came on board about 3 years ago. And really significantly with a lot of the place-based screens has been the last 2.5 years. So it's interesting to watch how they can now buy traditional direct, whether they're buying digital, static, transit, airports, or they can also buy that same exact media programmatically. So I think it's now allowed them to live in that space. I also think that people are very particular about what type of media and what type of products in the out-of-home space that they purchase. Or in the past, they may have just been freely, let's just buy all screens in the New York DMA. Now they look at it a little bit different and they kind of focus in on, okay, well, what does that product mean? How does data now play a role? So we have had our moments like all media right now and all publishers. It's, are we going to be in a recession? Are we not? So we still see these like little teeters. Are we approaching a significant war that may impact? So I think now we're beginning to be treated the same way that all other media, where in the past it's just been like, we'll cut out of home because we can't measure it and we don't know its effectiveness.
So you just brought up measurement, and admittedly, I have a couple other questions that have come to mind given some of what you just said. But I think it's important to pivot in that direction, especially knowing that our audience is focused in the ad tech space and programmatic buying. There's a lot of energy around performance. Now, to go back to some of what you've said, there's the presumption that if we're talking about out of home and anybody that's working with Lamar or anybody else in the out of home space, that people understand strategically what is the value of this medium relative to other media types. But there are people who have been sitting on the fence. And some of those people who've sit on the fence, it's because they're so accustomed to digital buying where there's this one-to-one attribution process. You see, you click, there's a look back window, and now I can say X volume of people have made this purchase relative to this amount of media investment. What type of conversation do you have with them if there are performance-oriented expectations?
Measurement is a big component, right? So we talked about the device ID passbacks, anonymous device IDs. That allows us to be the medium that helps generate more of the campaign and have a more impactful. Oh, wow, I saw that travel Texas, people kayaking down the Red River. I want to go there. Oh, wow, I just got on my Instagram ad, travel Texas, same exact creative, smaller. Click here. Oh, wow, now I got a banner ad. Now I'm on their website. Now, what I just explained to you, not only was a device ID passback, but also, as I mentioned with Gooder, we can drop in pixels, right? The other way that we can measure is through exposure. And then where did that anonymous device ID end? So I was exposed to that Target ad, whether I realized it or not, on a roadside billboard. That device ID over the next 10 days then ended up at a Target. Those are attributable to the out-of-home space. And then the last thing that we do is we work with a handful of brand lift study companies like M4, like Mira, just like in the online world, to where you can do brand lift studies, exposed, unexposed. So we've really gone the extra mile to make sure, like, okay, we understood what our limitations were in the past. It was like, okay, I know I'm buying 1.8 billion impressions over a 6-week period across 25 markets. We recognized that and we said, okay, well, what does measurement look like in the online world? What does it look like in the mobile world? How can we help complement? How can we help amplify a campaign? But most importantly, how can we utilize that same data, the same measurement, so that way we become a part of the campaign? Because we're not blind to the fact that we're not a one-to-one medium. I believe if we would be a one-to-one medium, it'd be very awkward, right? Because if you walked past a billboard and we were able to tap into your search browser history or Instagram history, envision yourself walking down Las Vegas Boulevard and having our digital bus shelters change based off of what you've searched in the last 20 minutes. That would be a very bad experience, maybe comical to some of us. But we do understand now with data, we can be one to targeted. Hey, I want to target a mom with 2+ kids that has an affinity towards discount big box retailers and have visited a MLB stadium within the last 60 days.
So I was going to say, I do envision that because in a lot of my presentations, if I'm just talking about innovation, the future of innovation, whether it's related to out of home or maybe I'm referring to the metaverse, I'll use the Tom Cruise Minority Report example of where, and I'm sure you bring it up in the out of home space all the time, right? Where it says like, do you need a new pair of pants, whatever his name is in Minority Report. And it's using presumed technology that's aligned with something that you're referring to, which is one-to-one. They're doing some sort of retina scan and we're presuming it's a world that we don't want to live in. I again assume that in the instance of someone who is approaching the out of home space, that there is a reasonable understanding of what out of home can bring to the table, but you're probably doing a lot of educating too. Sometimes people are so deeply in the weeds with performance, they just figure if there's now the letter D added onto out of home, or now there's a programmatic opportunity, that means it must be much more precise. And I think you can bring people maybe back down to earth in understanding that maybe even if you could have that, you wouldn't want to, given the user experience and also privacy regulation, which is going to increasingly make that challenging, maybe more challenging than it even is today.
Yeah. And I think we've all probably in the ad world have heard the story of even, similar to out of home, direct mail. And we've all heard the story of Target where there was a 15 or 16-year-old that was pregnant, became pregnant. Obviously, her parents didn't know. And obviously, over the next 3 weeks, Target was sending direct mail for Pampers diapers and all the formula. And it was kind of like, what the hell are we getting this for? We're 55 plus, we're not pregnant. So even the static traditional direct mail piece was being too hyper targeted. And that created all sorts of laws and et cetera. So we have to be careful because we're in the people space. So when we go to audience segmentation, the one that I just described, that happens a good bit. And we look at it as this way is yes, it's more precise towards an audience segmentation. And we would rather hit, hey, this panel during this time of day, highest indexes towards the audience that you're looking to hit, brand X. Therefore, we're going to bid and buy. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one experience, but we know we want to help amplify that conversation. The other benefit that out of home does to where you may get served a one-to-one ad on mobile or social is that experience and that brand interaction is only between the two of you. If I display something programmatically or just traditional direct digital, you may now be targeting a certain audience segmentation, but you have, I guess, in the online space, it's called spillage or overage. You're now hitting people that maybe you thought wasn't your brand segmentation and they see it. And that's not at all who you were targeting, but with great creative, with great use of retargeting, you were able then to pick up another consumer. That's the way that we kind of look at that space. We have a lot of regulations. We have a lot of privacy, especially with our airport inventory. Could we put a facial recognition? 100%. Simplest technology to put in. Have we tested it? Yes. We've tested, cameras within our shelters, within our airport inventory, where it could take at minimum your emotion, your ethnicity, and how your facial expressions are. But for us, there's significant amount of privacy and impacts that we stay away from. So when we talk about brand safety, we are brand safe in the sense that even down to we have restriction codes. So if we have digital or static and other medium that's in and around schools, churches, graveyards, we don't allow for alcohol. We don't allow for that medium. So even in the programmatic side of out of home, those restriction codes are built in to where you're not even able to run your ads based on those restriction codes. So we're very much at the forefront of technology. And could the day exist where Mr. Yakimoto needs to buy a new pair of khakis? Maybe, but it definitely won't be on a roadside billboard. And it would be in a very much closed one-to-one scenario.
I did want to also ask you about thinking about the funnel. If you're going after a buyer who's not digital out of home or out of home exclusive, and they're putting together a strategy and they want to figure out what should my expectations be for whatever the yield is from out of home or traditional programmatic or digital out of home, what are reasonable KPIs related to the out of home space?
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. It varies, right? Your KPIs may be, hey, I want to hit more people that then download that Spotify. I think if we're the only medium that's involved, and I'm talking more on the national brand side, not local advertisers, but if I'm utilizing the only vehicle that I'm using is billboards or airports or transit, and that's the only medium, I think you're not going to find your outcome to be as greater as it could be. It's going to do its job. It's going to drive brand awareness. Statistically, it's people that are exposed to out of home. Most recently in the Nielsen report that we had with the DOOH, it was 48% of consumers that are exposed to an out of home ad then go on to social to check out their social page. The other stats, 56% of consumers that are exposed to out of home then go on to search that product on Google or make some sort of search about that product. So what that does, Nora, is it really validates the fact that hey, if you're going to do a billboard campaign, you need to make sure that your search engine optimization is up to par. Like we do this test sometimes. I did one last night and I was like, well, that's a cool campaign. I went to search it on Google, literally wasn't even on the first 3 pages. We do the same thing with social. Like if you're going to push a specific brand or product, understand, and our local clients do this really well because we really advise them, understand that over half of the people that are exposed to those billboards are then going to go to your social sites, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it may be. You need to make sure there's some posting or some stories or reels that are relevant to what you have currently running and out of home. As far as KPIs, every category is different and every strategy is different. And I think that that's what really differentiates out of home is creativity drives the conversation. the call to action. So you may just want to have the most beautiful portrait. Again, going back to travel and tourism, you may want to have the most beautiful picturesque while you're in Chicago. And we do this a lot with cruises. And it's a beautiful cruise, and you're getting off the island of St. Lucia, and there's the beautiful Carnival cruise ship, and you're sitting there in the middle of a blizzard in March. That has a different impact than a mobile ad while you're sitting at home or watching a CTV ad while you're stuck at home. So the KPIs vary, but understanding that we now have the ability to measure that impact is something that in the past we just haven't. We're just kind of like, well, we know it worked because you have a beautiful brand and the creative looks great and it's hitting hundreds of thousands of people a day. I guess it's working. Those days are gone. The measurement's there.
Something else I wanted to ask you about, Ian, was you just mentioned making sure that there's somewhere for people to go to after they've experienced your out of home activation. And that may require that there is some sort of call to action. So are there recommended CTAs? People oftentimes will joke about make sure that people aren't trying to scan a QR code as they're driving down the highway because they'll hurt somebody or they'll get in an accident. But are there some best practices that you suggest in a series of different instances where someone will want to make that fast connection because they're not going to put in some long URL because they'll never remember that?
Yeah, it's so if you asked me that question when I first started, it would be, well, probably even before that. But the big thing that people used to do in out of home and in general was like, oh, we got to put a phone number on there. And nor we still deal with that at the local level. They're like, well, I want to put my phone number on there. It's like nobody calls you anymore. So my point is I'm glad you said no QR codes on roadside billboards because first off, they don't work. We have clients that are like, yeah, but I still want to do it. And I'm like, well, we restrict those because again, we want to not only be brand safe, but we also want to have a safe experience. But more importantly, go try it for yourself. Just run down the street and have your daughter hold up a QR code and tell me how that works out for you. It just doesn't work, right? But it does work on other mediums. So we do see a good bit of on transit, airports, other walkable out of home experiences where we encourage QR codes. So we encourage people on the transit pedestrian stuff. If a movie house blitzes a bus shelter market in a certain city, then yes, we encourage QR. We actually play in the RFID tags. We play with the push notification abilities. But as it relates to best practices for call to actions outside of those mediums, we live in a world today where curiosity is the most important thing. So if you have Defender and have fantastic, beautiful creative, and maybe it is contextually relevant because you utilize data and you have baseball bags in the back of it and you show the rough ruggedness of the product. We're very curious humans and we know that we have the vehicle, we have the ability to say, all right, perfect. That's a Defender. I'm going to go search it and I'm going to learn more about it. It's almost like you don't need a call to action because the call to action was the creative and it was that beautiful experience that you had. So very rarely do we see certain call to actions. Now we may have something simple like Travel Texas, which I love their campaign that's running. It just says traveltexas.com very subtly, just to remind me that's what it is. But for the most part, the brands tell the story themselves and out of home allows the experience. But it is why I go back to my point. You have to be buttoned up. You have to make sure that if you're going to have the Defender creative, that when I go to that website, that giant experience may be the same creative or some variation of it. And then that's when I'm going to go do my research. I don't need you to give me the website, the handle, the backslash, etc. You may just have that Instagram logo with the @ handle on it, just to tell me where to go.
In those instances, I imagine that brands like, for example, Land Rover or Travel Texas or whatever the particular big out-of-home buyer is, they don't have an attribution expectation, meaning that they're not trying to necessarily connect it back directly to that campaign, but rather maybe they're looking for lift, like lift in website visitation, but it can't be directly connected back to that campaign or that media type, so long as that's not a priority for them. Are there, in the event that an advertiser is really concerned and they're not going to use a QR code or they want an alternative, Are there ever things that are suggested that people can remember so it doesn't just boil down to them having to Google something else?
Yeah, I think it depends on the notoriety of the brand itself. Obviously, if I see the Land Rover logo, I can quickly figure out, even if I didn't know that that was a Defender. More, if you want to go more at the local level, yeah, that's important. But that's where the creative kind of really shines. So simplicity of, hey, if my KPIs is I want to drive more people to download a certain app, then on top of the fact that I should be retargeting those consumers with an experience on the mobile device that are exposed to the out of home, but it may simply be the Apple logo and the Android logo, download today. Again, we're very savvy consumers. Especially during the pandemic, we've really seen this heightened of like, hey, I can go out and find whatever I want. The web is a beautiful place. Social has now blown and blossomed into this organic creativity experience. I just need to have some sort of guidance. Like, here's the Instagram logo, very subtle, and here's the handle. To learn more, search X. So just start me down the path to make sure that I didn't think that that was my wife thinks that the Ford Broncos look exactly like the Defenders. And I'm like, they're completely different vehicles. But what you don't want to experience is you didn't have that Land Rover logo on there. Maybe you put the local Peretti, who's the Land Rover dealer, if you're at the local level, to where you at least guide them. But my overall point is that you don't have to have that call to action, whether you're local, national brand. We're very intuitive and we're very curious people. But again, it's why I'm so infatuated with the omni-channel approach is out of home could be that initial driver that where you then hit them with that Spotify push notification of like, here's the most recent country album that just dropped by music singer X.
And for a lot of folks that are going to be listening to this particular podcast, there is going to be curiosity around that, right? Like attribution is so central to a lot of the ways that they're trying to prove out the value of any medium. So it's good to hear that. I know this has already been a long conversation, but I think I've been thinking about a lot of different things and have curiosity to ask about them. So to bring it back to programmatic buying or programmatic digital out of home, I know much earlier on in our conversation, you mentioned that ultimately digital is a smaller component of the much larger out of home footprint. And that I imagine programmatic is a smaller segment of that, since some of that digital is going to be exclusively bought site direct through individual sales points of contact. So in terms of what you can uniquely do programmatically, are there any things for programmatic buyers to learn about from you that they may otherwise not know because they're not exposed to this style of buying, like simplicity of targeting, the speed with which they can find markets, like any other details like that from a strategic planning and targeting perspective?
Yeah. And look, we've built out a team here that I have 0 sales reps because the why is because education is the most important thing. So we spend most of our time, and I spend most of my time educating the omni-channel DSPs, educating the brands direct. So we get this question a lot, and it's very much what you're doing today for your brand, whether it's online, mobile, social, what you're doing today, we have that same ability. And not only do we have that ability, but you can do it in the same exact platform and whoever you have your seat on. As it relates to the ability, that's something different. Going back to creativity, creative is the most important thing. So we've already touched on the fact that it's massive in scale itself. You have this blank canvas that you can do so many beautiful things. Well, one of the things that we've also brought into the programmatic space that we've been doing for quite some time in the out of home digital side was dynamic content. So we have Bally's for the Atlanta Braves programmatically that runs live scores. So their games only begin, they only buy whenever their games begin. So obviously they're doing impression based, audience targeting, baseball enthusiasts, blah, blah, blah. But the coolest part for them is the ability to have real live scores. We touched on the weather example, the NBA, depending on when this launches during the playoffs, we're going to be streaming live tweets from the NBA as well as live scores, all the way down to, and this is the most basic thing that out of home does, because location and proximity are the most important thing. And I'm making an assumption here. A good friend of mine played for the Cubs forever, big Cubs fan myself. And we have a digital network that's downtown near Wrigleyville. Our creative can play content based off of real-time outcomes. So Nora, you're in Chicago as you're walking around Wrigleyville and you may be having lunch. And next thing you know, it's not necessarily the Cubs that are promoting or the MLB, but you may be a closet gambler and you have a certain app on your phone and you love to bet on baseball, which highly recommend. Don't ever bet on baseball. But based on your app and based on those consumers that are walking by, you may have DraftKings and it shows you the real-time lines, the betting lines during that game that's about to happen in 3 hours. So again, context and location are key. And the last point, going to location, is from a creative perspective, one of the benefits of out of home is what's in proximity, what's in the area. We've had campaigns such as New Balance and others where they're targeting over 75 to 100 different New Balance stores across so many cities. As opposed to that, they're able to provide one piece of creative and dynamically based on when and where that buy is happening and the location of that board when you're bidding and buying, we're passing that information back. And dynamically, the location of the store in the correct font that that creative team uses is displayed. So you have the New Balance shoe, you have available now at, and then dynamically that's dropping it in. I would say that that's probably the biggest differentiator is creative and then the dynamic side of it. And then obviously the ease of buying. So the ability just for us to build out a deal, whether that's a specific deal ID for a specific PMP for a specific campaign and KPIs, or very simplistic, just like they do in the online and mobile space, we can just build out an evergreen deal for your brand and just push it over to you. And when and wherever you want to buy, whether it's open exchange or PMP, you don't have to contact a sales rep. So the process doesn't slow down. It's very much, I'm buying in real time. And based on the measurement across all other media, I can add spend, I can remove spend, just the way that you can do in all other medias.
I'll wrap on this question. You've mentioned to me earlier, we've talked about this in the past, that you do a lot of speaking engagements. You have your own podcast. So a part of you continuing to tour the country and have those conversations is that you must be involved in a lot of dialogue about the future of digital out of home and maybe programmatic digital out of home as well. What are you excited about that people are having conversations about as far as innovation in this realm?
I think if you're going far future, I think being a part of the driverless car itself, or even driverless car 4, where the Teslas are moving towards and a handful of others, how does out of home then drive to that car screen? Don't freak out, everybody. This would be an opt-in thing, and we would work with each different vehicle. And then wearables. We all live in this world now where we have an Apple Watch or we have some sort of a wearable. I wear a Whoop. How great would it be if you're standing next to a digital bus shelter and it knows that you burnt 700 calories this morning, and then it triggers a Smoothie King ad for one of their products. That's kind of future stuff. What excites me today is the ability to continue to educate people on the medium, because so often, Nora, we get the conversation where it's like, I had no idea out of home could be a part of my conversation. I had no idea that you could do device ID passbacks. The evolution of e-commerce is going to be big in the out-of-home space, not just programmatic, but the traditional direct side. That excites me. And honestly, we didn't talk about this, but AI and ChatGPT-3 from a creative perspective and from a rate optimization perspective, I think that that's going to be super exciting. And it's something that we're focused on. And I know the industry, half of us sit in one camp, half of us sit in the other. But again, embracing technologies and better understanding how and what it does for us, I think is imperative.
I had a lot of questions over this hour for you because my mind is spinning in so many directions. And I imagine for folks who haven't bought in this space or have thought about it and haven't quite made the jump yet, this is a good starting place to start thinking and brainstorming more deeply. So thanks for the conversation, Ian.
Yeah, I love it. This was so much fun. And again, for us, our biggest hurdle is, like all other medium, is just evolving and educating. And I'm grateful for you and the platform to do this, but this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for the time. Thanks to Ian Dallimore, VP of Digital Growth and GM of Programmatic at Lamar Advertising, for both a crash course and his perspective on out-of-home and digital out-of-home. With a rising volume of advertisers looking to build more integrated marketing plans, And with tighter media budgets this year, bringing nuanced strategy to all aspects of a digital buy is just table stakes for advertisers and brands. Ian also has a podcast you can check out called Digital and Dirt, where he discusses out-of-home and a broad array of other marketing and advertising topics. You can check out Digital and Dirt wherever you find your podcasts. And while you're at it, take a moment to subscribe to this podcast. There are many more smart guests scheduled for the year, and we'll be back with more episodes of AdTech Unfiltered very soon.